presentation a fair amount of time afterwards for questions and answers, because I know that's probably where we'll get the best bang for the buck out of it fairly short. So we'll have two part players that are at the state level. One from the Air Quality Smoke Management Division, Lloyd Levita, he'll be remotely. And Kirk Will is in the audience here. Kirk will be talking about the FCC and their requirements and other state issues with prescribed fire. Like I say, we really want a lot of discussion, so at the end we'll have some more time for discussion. We'll have a nonprofit member alliance presentation. We'll be talking about a non-government organization, challenges from their point of view. And then Rod and Roger, who's chair of the council, Rod will be talking about from a private operator point of view, from a business point of view, what are the opportunities, challenges, things to think about. And we didn't know exactly what the audience would be. It would be, fire departments or county, like county open lands, or potentially landowner groups. So we kind of brought in a whole mix of different speakers. So, it's a very brief introduction. I want to give you to the council. A little bit of my background. I was thinking about it last night. Actually, I thought about it. I started burning vials in high school, getting ready for it. So I was 17. And then, of course, things over the last many years improved this day. No more can you just go out and throw an axe and watch things go. It's a little bit more complex than that. So anyway, I've been doing this kind of thing since high school. Got more professional about it at the Air Force Academy, and then with the State Forest Service. And the final part of my career was the Navy Conservancy, and I was able to describe the firearms. So if I could hit this slide, there we go. Okay, so this is our Health Council presentation. Not moving. So, technology, I'm semi-retired. Somebody told me that oh, there. Okay. So this is the mission of the council. We want to provide a unified voice for land managers and people who are advocates, and not necessarily advocates, people who are just really interested in prescribed fire, to have a place to communicate with them. Okay, thanks. The history of the council organized in 2007. At that point, we realized that we needed to have a better voice to represent prescribed fire as a tool. And we knew that it's a very valuable tool. It's one of several. And we represent all in-risk participants. And we want prescribed fire to be safe and effective. And part of that process early on, we were instrumental in working with the legislature and created the prescribed fire legislation for Colorado. So we're open to anyone. The steering board, you can see, is a list of different folks from different organizations, and we get together periodically. As fire seasons got more complex, we get together a lot less frequently. And we are a member of what's called the National Coalition of Fire Councils. And through that coalition, we get support and information sharing at the national level. So you can pick up tidbits of information from all across the country. So we focus on promotion, safety, effective use. We look at barriers. We work with the state of Colorado on smoke regulations and fire DFPC policies, prescribed fire requirements. We host workshops, field trips, try to just exchange information, and we really are an outreach and education project right now. Why? Well, we value Colorado's resources. Most of our members are managers that are trying to protect communities, watersheds, etc. And again, we think that prescribed fire is a really important tool. We can do a lot of good things at the right place at the right time. We have a web page. There's the address right there. Feel free, please go look at it. We have a map. Needs some revision. We're working on that. We have announcements. We have links to other resources for prescribed fire education and outreach. So very briefly, that's an introduction to the council. First person up today. Well, let me ask you, have any questions first? Okay. If we're not addressing your concerns, please ask during one of the discussion periods. Okay. Now we need to transfer this. Where's the IT expert? All right. We need to transfer it to Boyd. Boyd will get it. State air quality. As I heard, Boyd is on fire. Looks like he's not.
Yeah, you guys got me. You guys hear me? See me?
We can hear you.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so yeah, thank you for letting me join in today. Been looking forward to this. Yeah, in fact, I'm en route back home. I've been on an assignment with Rocky Mountain Team Black in California. I had to depart from them a little bit early, so I'm on my way home. And but it works out great that I could do this virtually and present that from here. So thanks for having me. Let's see, I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll go ahead and share my screen for that. And if somebody could let me know that you're seeing that, that would be fantastic. Are you seeing my first slide, Colorado Smoke Management Program?
Got it, Boyd, thanks.
Very good, thanks. Yeah, so smoke is always the issue when we talk about prescribed fire. Let's see where to start. So a little bit about me. I've been in Colorado most of my career. I had a lengthy career with Colorado State Forest Service. I was a forester and a district forester for some time. I worked at district offices in Golden and Franktown and Alamosa and Fort Collins. So a little bit of a exposure to different parts of the state, involved in a range of fuels projects, lots of pile burning, some broadcast burning, and had some exposure to that environment and trying to make those things happen in Colorado. So got a little bit of background with that. About 2 years ago, I switched jobs. I left the State Forest Service and I went to work for Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, being the field liaison for the smoke management program. So that's been a change in what I'm doing and the circles I run in, but it's been good. It's been a real interesting run. Most of it has been during the COVID era, so I'm sure it's not a representation of what prescribed fire is or could be in Colorado for that era, but that is the hand we're dealt and what we're working on. So anyways, I've got just a little slideshow to go through some of these issues and things that we're working on. A picture of note there is the Arapahoe Roosevelt did a burn earlier this summer up at Magic Feather near Red Feather Lakes, and it was notable in the sense that it's kind of getting into what we would call the traditional summer season, kind of moderated conditions this year at that time. So it was fun to see somebody do a broadcast burn at that time of year. Okay, next slide. So let's see. Whoa, there we go. So these issues that are related, especially to new programs and just what you're thinking about it. So just smoke is this inevitable part of it. It is a health concern, no matter how you slice it. It's just a matter of the dose that you receive. And in some cases, nobody ever knows you burned. And in some cases, there is some impacts and communities are going to be affected. And that's just something you have to consider, as well as the fire service. Your exposure to smoke for you implementers. Your exposure to smoke is considerably higher on prescribed fire than it is on suppression activity. So there's just lots of reasons for that, but just know that and your exposure to that, and just be mindful about it and mitigate that as you can. There's times that smoke can be a factor for transportation. If you're burning next to roads, there's always going to be the wind switch that brings smoke the other way, and just thinking about that and planning for that and being aware of it. And then every implementer experiences this, that when you have the prescription to burn, everything's lined up. You've got the weather, you've got the people, you've got everything, and then you get this adjective rating for your smoke dispersion that's just not quite there. So that can limit the burn windows. So other issues is that prescribed fire, one of the places that's most needed and does the most value is in the wildland urban interface. Yet that's the rub. That's going to be the place where there's the most potential for smoke impacts on people. So this takes lots of effort and coordination and outreach and implementation just to do that and make that work well. And then there's years like the last couple of years where we've just been pounded by smoke exposure from wildfires. Last year they were from Colorado. This year they weren't even in Colorado. It was just smoke from Western states drifting into our state, and every day for extended periods of time we had bad air because of these things. So that's definitely brings it to people's attention, and it's on their minds. So it can have both a positive and negative effect on prescribed fire, because on one hand, the point of prescribed fire is to reduce these big, bad, negative impacts of wildfire, and it can do that. So tolerating a little bit of smoke for a short duration, people, when they get it, what prescribed fire is about, are often on board with that. There's other times though, and it's up to you to read your community, where maybe they've just had enough. Maybe they just need a break, and give them that break from smoke. So anyways, bottom line is that if smoke management is a limiting factor for you, is a constraint on your project, just talk to us. We do the permitting, and we want it to work. We want prescribed fire to work in Colorado, and we'll be willing to work with you on how to get that done. So of course, there's a permit process in Colorado, as there is in basically every state. There's a couple of flavors of it, and based on the scale of project you wanted to do. So if you were doing a pretty small project, 50 hand piles or less a year, that falls under what are the open burning regulations, and that's a free permit. In many cases, counties administer those. Other times it's CDPHE, but real basic stuff, and no ventilation condition put on it. So you could burn under poor dispersal just because there's a small amount of material, and it's just gonna get dispersed that way. So that'd be the open burning flavor of permit. And for some WUI projects and some landowners, 50 piles in a burn season would do that, and that'd be a nice option for being able to handle pile burning in that case. More than 50 piles or other types of treatments, whether they're mechanical, machine pile burning, all those kind of things would fall under what we refer to as our smoke management program. And that's where you'd apply for a permit from Air Pollution Control Division. Myself, Colleen Campbell, and Scott Landis staff that function. Then we issue a permit based on your application. We set daily permit conditions. There's notifications that we're asking you to make to us, and then a reporting on what you actually did. And there's fees for that. Of course, some burners is a percentage pay, but like a local government or a private landowner or somebody is going to be $100 flat fee for that permit. Whoa. So we set these conditions for these permits based on kind of two primary factors. It's a fuel type, pretty coarse, and distance to what you identify as the nearest homes and or nearest receptors for that. So obviously the heavier the fuel loading and the closer to the community or the impact of that smoke, we're going to have a lower daily allowable scale of that, whether it's number of piles on a pile burn or acres for a broadcast burn. So, and that's of course based on the dispersion conditions. So if we've got good dispersion, which generally means good mixing heights, air can move up, and enough wind in that transport layer that is going to move it off, that's the ideal situation. We would love to see all the burning done under that. There's rarely any kind of smoke impacts under good, very good or excellent conditions. Then there's the fair, and then there's poor. So fair, we reduce that a daily amount we would allow somebody to burn, and then poor, in most cases there's no burning. However, it's worth reading your permit and getting to know it, that if it is snowing, there's going to be an allowance. If there's a snowstorm forecast, there's going to be allowance for pile burning. And then there's also maybe just some cases where we would allow a variance for some kind of experimental case where we would just allow something and then try to collect some data on that through smoke sensors and photography and other ways, and just try to establish that. Because one of the things we're looking into is those threshold levels. So poor is based on a ventilation rating, which is that mixing height times the transport wind. It just is a ventilation factor. And that was set probably fairly arbitrarily. Most states have a similar threshold right there. And we're just looking at that and evaluating that. If that is in the right place, maybe there's another ventilation category in between poor and fair that some burning could be done. But we're looking at that, and we're looking for case studies that can accomplish that. So other things that we do allow people to burn. So say, for example, aerial ignition. So broadcast burn, it just makes sense because of rough terrain or the size of a unit or some other reason they wanted to do a bigger unit. And that unit probably exceeds what the standard conditions are. So, but we can allow that. And one of the mitigations they would do is have an earlier end time of ignition. So at the time they have completed their last bit of ignition or just letting the rest of the unit burn out, that time and sunset is a factor. That just gives the atmosphere more time to clear smoke and move it out of there. So if they can, it often works out reasonably well for aerial ignition to end fairly early in the day, maybe 3 or 4 hours prior to sunset. And that gives that unit time to consume and burn and a column to lift and the transport winds to move it out of there. So good mitigation, just example of one thing that we might do for that. That would fall under what we would call a non-standard permit. There's a really interesting one going on currently with the Bureau of Land Management down in Durango. They've submitted a permit for what's called the Anima City Mountain Burn, which is that mesa that's directly north of Durango. So literally everybody's looking at it. There's tons of recreation on there. People live all sides of it. And there's certainly going to be some smoke impact on that. But they've done some really good work to set it up to get it to a point where they can start burn planning and doing a permit for the smoke. They have just, they've done lots of mechanical treatment up there that's been effective, and that's going to reduce the smoke. They've got a good momentum going in the San Juan Basin for outreach and prescribed fire. That's probably one of the places in Colorado that's got the most, some of the most prescribed fire activity. It's kind of routine-ish. At least people know about it and encounter smoke from that. And so they're building on that and are just saying that, you know, people are getting it, that that's part of our ecosystem, and to burn is necessary for us to have this ecosystem to continue to function like it is. They also had the 416 fire in 2018 that burned right in this very area. So, and that's a case where the smoke impact from the wildfire has been an asset to prescribed fire in the area, just because people are able to make that connection between benefits from the prescribed fire versus the heavy smoke impacts from the wildfire. So they're going to do early ignition. They're going to be placing some smoke sensors on there, so we have some data. So the plan is to have a 2-day burn. They'll burn some units on the first day, and then just based on what that smoke does and what it does overnight and how heavily it drains down into Durango, they may or may not be able to resume burning on the next day. So if it does clear well and not much impact down in the valley, they can resume that next day. If there is impacts, we're going to ask them to hold for another day. So for you, though, how not everybody is at that level, and just thinking about getting the program going, or whether you're new to it or you're implementing in a place that doesn't have a lot of background like the San Juan Basin does. So I just threw up here a couple of these quick points. These relationships are really important. That probably is not a surprise to you, but with your local fire community. If you are the fire department, with your neighboring fire departments, with the local land management agencies, with DFPC. Just building those relationships and working together and just helping each other think through things and plan and coordinate is always a win. The relationship with the leadership of your own organization is important. If you're in a institution, your manager or the director of your place or the district ranger or whoever runs in circles that you don't, and they might be bumping into the county commissioners or city council or those type of people, and if they're understanding what you're doing and are on board with that, they're going to give you a positive voice at the interaction they get. So that's an important place to spend some work. And of course, that would apply with a landowner too, you know, working on private lands. If a landowner's gotten to that point, they clearly have some understanding, but just giving them the best information and the best that you can, investing in them, so that, because they're going to be talking to their neighbors without a doubt about it. And that's a good way to foster that. Start that way, do a good job, and watch that interest expand. Outreach for your burn projects is the notification, and we ask people to do that as part of the permit, just as a rule, but it's not just a rule, it's good practice, and it's going to help you. It's your community that you're burning in, and letting people know is a really important part of it, even if you don't think they're going to be impacted. Just because there's pretty likely going to be a case there's somebody with a smoke sensitivity. You know, there's data that suggests that as much as 30% of the population has got some kind of possible negative impact from smoke, whether it's asthma or COPD or other respiratory illnesses that can be impacted negatively by smoke, which may way more than you or I just in our normal lives. So, but if they have time and if they know it's coming, they can make a plan and do that. So it's just good practice. So And the better and the more variety of media you can do that, the better, because people are looking at all kinds of different stuff. And if they know about it in advance, it's always a better thing. So when you do get a permit and you get these burn permit conditions on there, take the time to learn about it and what that means. And just really try to understand what the window is. And we can for sure help you to do that, but take the time to study it and learn that. Also learn how to determine the ventilation for your site. The Fire Weather Dashboard website does a very good job of that. You can point and click on your place and it'll give you many days out ventilation as well as other fire weather information. So understand that and understand how your permit relates to that. And also the National Weather Service point and click website has got ways you can derive that as well. And at the same point I made earlier, if that is not working for you, or if it doesn't appear like you have a window based on what those burn permit conditions are, please talk to us. We'll work with you, try to help you figure out what that window is going to be. So after many decades of wanting to see this and hoping for it and struggling with trying to find ways to do it, Air Pollution Control Division and the state OIT are developing an online system for the smoke management permits. We've been in kind of a discovery and design phase with it this summer. We will really soon go into testing of that, and it'll allow you to do your permit request and do the renewals online on a website. The downside is you're going to have another account and password, sorry, but we will have that and you'll be able to do that. And we'll still do an approval, but it's not necessarily going to be emailing the Word documents back and forth to each other. You'll also be able to do the forms D&E, the daily notification and the daily reporting on the website as well. So we're looking forward to that. It's going to help us out a lot on our end. And we're excited to see that coming together. I forgot the other point I was going to make about that. So here's what it's approximately going to look like. It's going to be just a website you log into through this web page client. You'll put in burn name, burn type, etc. For the standard application, you'll also be able to apply for a non-standard if you'd like. And you'll have the opportunity to renew, and it'll be such that unlike the Word document, it's only going to pop up data points you need to put in. It's not going to put up the entire form and not ask you to put in things that may not apply to your project, but we'll be testing that soon, and we're excited about that. It's called CoCamp, Colorado Clean Airshed Management Portal. CAMP is, of course, a nod to Colleen Campbell, who has been working in the smoke management program for a long time, decades worth, and has been advocating and pushing for us, all of us, burners, helping us find windows, but also pushing for this online portal. So we're pretty excited about that, and glad to give a shout out to Colleen on that. So just a little bit about the activity that we've had lately. Of course, you guess what would happen with 2020 and COVID, way down on everything. Broadcast burning there was probably only a handful that were completed prior to March of 2020 when all the restrictions went into place for gatherings. And that was the primary reason for the broadcast acres to be so low, is that they typically take a bigger organization, and just the number of, we were looking at 10 people or less, and there's not many broadcast burns you do with that many people. So those were lower. Pile burning was down, but didn't zero out, of course. You know, that spring burning season was almost over, but last winter, fair amount of pile burning resumed and carried on, especially once we got after the new year there. So down, we'll just have to see what 2021 brings. I've got some numbers on that next, but that's coming. So 2021 coming along, actually fair amount of broadcast burning, all things considered. Some pretty big west slope burns primarily. Pile burning got going. We had some snow over the winter, so that continued on. So we'll just see how that continues into the fall. So something else that affects our ability to implement prescribed fire is this really drought conditions all over the West. If you look at the drought monitor, we're in a really heavy drought in almost the entire West. Colorado caught a bit of a break, at least the east, the Front Range and the central mountains. The western parts, Northwest is still pretty dry, but the rest of the West is really grim in terms of drought. And what that does is drive a lot of fire activity, puts us into this national planning level 5. And really those things, all between all the smoke, all the commitment of the fire community and PL5 also precludes us from being able to do much prescribed fire. So just it's just the world we live in, and we'll just deal with that and just look for the opportunities we can and the windows that we can get. So anyways, I didn't time myself. I have no idea where I'm at on time, but that's pretty much all I got on there. Be happy to take some questions now, or as you think of them through the day. Feel free to put them in the chat for now, or email me or something. Be glad to take questions at this time. Thanks.
Any questions for the board right now? Let's see.
It might be loud enough, I think, so. Will this PowerPoint and other PowerPoint presentations be available to us?
It's being recorded. The whole presentation is being recorded.
Thank you.
Yeah, I could email it in too if you'd like, Mike. I could just send it to you and you can post it if you'd like to.
Okay. So what you mentioned a lot about, I guess I'll just ask, is there a workshop or some way for folks that are just getting started where they can get the basics of how to go through this permit process? That many of us have done it for a long time, and we know like some of the parameters, but there's always a new wrinkle. So is there some kind of place where folks could go to get a little more in-depth?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we're in a bit of a transition right now because of this online. I'd be glad just to work with anybody one-on-one tutoring type relationship, just to help them think it through and see what's appropriate for their project. So for now, let's just do it that way. I'm not necessarily going to make an event for that, but when we get the online portal, we'll have some online products. We'll have some documentation for that, and then we'll also be doing some kind of workshop or presentation of that on how to do the permitting. So that is coming probably this winter sometime.
Yes.
I have a question about the online portal. Hi, Boyd. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the online portal. It sounds very cool. I'm curious if that's going to be accessible to the public to view permits that have been approved or reviewed and issued and whatnot, or if it's purely a portal for people who are applying for the permit. Thanks.
Yeah, it's going to be for the people the applicants. So you'll have an account, and you'll of course sign into your account, and you will probably be able to view other people's permits as well as access and work on your own and we will have a different display for public. So we will probably ultimately be showing a map of where the permit locations are, other data like that. But no, public won't be able to access your permit at this time.
Any other issues, questions? This is the man, if you have concerns about air quality. Person can help you.
Looks like there's a couple on the chat.
Okay,
Let's see.
yeah. Thank you.
What's the question?
See. No, I don't think so.
Hey Boyd, I had a question there in the chat. I don't know if you can see it, but how do you guys handle any insurance requirements in Colorado?
Are you talking about smoke?
Well, just for doing prescribed burning. Isn't that part of it? You know, when people are doing their application and stuff, are they not getting insurance? I'm in Arizona and we had the prescribed burn council here, and that was one of the big challenges is could not get anybody to cover the insurance component of that. So that really made it challenges here in Arizona.
Yeah, great question, Floyd. Great question. I'm gonna actually punt it to Dave and or Rod at a later presentation on the insurance. It's not a factor on the smoke part of it, which is the part I do, but certainly it's a consideration, and that is a great question. So hopefully Dave or Rod could handle that one better than I can. Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, no, much, totally appreciate that. Yeah, it's something with the process, but you're right, not part of the smoke component. Yeah.
And this is Rod Moraga. Yeah, my presentation will be speaking about insurance. However, that is in the private sector, which is, I assume, what you're asking.
Yeah, as far as, yeah, prescribed burn councils and stuff. Yep.
Yes. I'll repeat it.
Oh. Are there certain air pollution control districts, where the air quality is currently so poor that, and I'm thinking of the Denver metro area, where controlled burn is difficult because of the contributed smoke?
Because of what?
Because of the contributed smoke. I went to Colorado State Land Board. We were a couple of years ago looking to do prescribed burn on large property in the Denver area. Because of the base level where quality is so poor.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize, and I hope this floats. Ladies with the State Land Board, and she was told a couple of years ago they could not burn because the base level of the air quality was so bad they could not contribute additional smoke to that. So are there areas in the state where that's pretty consistent and you just can't burn? Is that close?
Yeah.
So I'm not aware of that situation where there'd be a place where there would be no burning at any time. There's certainly atmospheric conditions that would make a time and a place not a good choice to burn in just because there's not dispersal. Yeah, so no, I'm not aware of that. I don't believe we have that in Colorado. We've got smoke sensitive areas that we've defined, and they're around most sizable communities, but they do not preclude burning in them. There's just going to be other considerations to your prescription and how and when you burn.
So that would be where you would have one of your special permit requirement, where you need to read the permit carefully.
Right.
Okay.
Where was that at?
That was at the Lowry property that's on the southeast side of the metro area.
Okay.
It's a 25,000 acre orange, short grass prairie ranch with a couple of galleries going through it.
Okay.
I'll chat with you afterward since I'm with this DFPC.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Podcast, Bernie,
Sure.
maybe I can answer some of your questions too. With that.
Okay, so I got one more. If you got- Yes,
Just a question about the non-standard permits. Wondering if you have a sense in your mind of how many of the permits are standard versus non-standard, like what proportion of permits are non-standard? And from your position, what would make it easier to go through a non-standard permit process, if in fact that's a good idea?
Yeah, really good question. So I would say probably about 10% of the permits we do are non-standard. There are generally done for bigger quantity, so bigger acreage, like aerial ignition. If they're going to use that, it's generally better, more cost effective to do a bigger unit, and that's a good place to do that. Other times we've done that are like more remote burns, where they're quite a ways from any kind of community, and maybe even just relatively few ranches or other kind of dwellings nearby. We would do some non-standard conditions to allow a bigger unit to be burned, just because we perceive there'd be a lower chance of impact on smoke. So not a problem at all. We want to help make it work, and we want to hear proposals on what implementers' ideas are on how they might implement and mitigate and do those things. So yeah, we'd encourage that, and that also informs what the conditions are. So those are primarily set, but acres per day and pile volume per day, based on those two things: the fuel loading and the distance to people. And so those are set. So as you'd guess, Colorado's, there's lots of variety. There's great big skies, there's great big, eastern Colorado is just gigantic, and the atmosphere moves, and the same way with big places in the San Luis Valley and the western slope, and lots of places have great dispersion and are going to be far away from people and are going to go beautifully. But there's other places where it's tighter, tight mountain valleys, heavy fuel loading in some places. It's just more difficult. So that's the reason we've got standard conditions, but also what's really nice about having non-standard and being able to do some of these kind of experimental level burns, just to collect some more data and get some data points on where those things are.
I'll make one final comment. Thanks, Boyd. One thing I would suggest to everybody is, if you're going to start a program and you have an issue about smoke, Boyd is definitely a very good contact. But often there are people in your management community nearby that have experience. So talk to those people also. Local conditions are important. Sometimes the column goes up and you think it's going to go left, it goes right. And some people have had experience with that, and they can help you learn how to predict that. So work with your neighbors too. Okay, Boyd, thanks for your time. And I don't know, you're going to be around later for the final questions?
Probably not, but I will hang around here at least through the break.
Okay, thank you, Boyd. So Kirk Will is in person, and I'll just hand it over to Kirk.
I'll boot it up. I don't usually use Zoom, we use Google, so I have to have my IT guy here.
And I charge double.
Good, yeah. It works. Okay, Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Kirk Will. I'm the Prescribed Fire and Fuels Unit Chief for the State of Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control. Bear with me, I'm getting over a cold. It truly is just a cold. I got tested twice, so we're good to go. A little bit about myself. I got started in wildland fire in 1996 in Southeast Montana, U.S. Forest Service. Worked around for the Forest Service in the Black Hills, Arapahoe, Roosevelt. Went over to the State Forest Service in 2007 and then to DFPC in 2012. Managed to get a degree in forestry, in fire management and range at the same time. Went to school with a few folks in this room at CSU. And then really got interested in prescribed fire and fuels management while I was in college. Did a lot of prescribed fire with the U.S. Forest Service. Got my burn boss too, and have gone forward ever since. So I'm really passionate about fuels and prescribed fire, and I really like to get more on the landscape. So what I want to talk to you guys today about is our prescribed fire program at DFPC, how we work within the state, and then state rules, Colorado revised statutes that guide prescribed fire in the state of Colorado. Okay, so you got to start out with your mission statement. That's just what we have to do. You know, we're here to serve and safeguard the people and protect the property, resources, and environment and quality of life in Colorado. So we're here to protect all of our resources for the enjoyment of all that come here to play and live here. Okay, and prescribed fire is part of that. DFPC under statute is the prescribed fire, I guess, experts for the state of Colorado within the state government side. So our role in prescribed fire, we do assistance to state, local, and federal agencies and private individuals. We do project design and planning, technical review, a lot of tech advice to a lot of folks. I do a lot of tech review plans for even our federal partners as well. We do implementation. We administer the Colorado Certified Burn Program, which I'll talk about a little bit. If you don't know about it, it's designed to give limited liability protection to folks under state law. If something were to go wrong in a prescribed burn, we have two levels. We have a certified burner A and a certified burner B, A being broadcast burning, B being pile burning. There's a class you have to take and training burns you have to complete before you're certified and then given that limited liability protection under law. If you guys have any questions about that, you can contact me here later, and I'll have my email address and phone number for you guys later. And then we also work on creating and updating all planning documents and implementation guidance for state of Colorado folks and or local and non-governmental organizations. Okay. Our goals, you know, first of all, we want to provide for firefighter and public safety. That's our first priority whenever we're planning and implementing a burn. We ensure that risk management is incorporated into all planning and implementation. We go through a whole set of complexities, risk analysis. The plan itself is a large complexity analysis and risk analysis on the burn and how to mitigate that. We want to use prescribed fire in a safe, carefully planned, and cost-efficient manner. We want to put prescribed fire in the right place at the right time. We're not out there burning just to burn. We want it placed where it needs to be placed when it does, when it happens. The past couple of years have definitely been challenging for prescribed burning for all agencies in the state due to COVID and especially the drought. So I'm hoping we're just going to start being able to get a little bit more on the ground again. But that's been a challenge with some of the drought levels we've had. We want to reduce that wildfire risk to communities, the watersheds, especially we're really thinking outside the box nowadays. We're doing a lot of watershed scale projects anymore. We're doing a lot of cross boundary types of work where we're not stopping at the fence anymore. We're doing agreements with federal partners, local partners, private individuals, so we can burn and stop the burn where it makes sense instead of just at the boundary. That's proven that it wasn't working. We need to start thinking more large scale, watershed scale, and I think we're even seeing that even with just the fuels management projects themselves. I know Bale's doing quite a bit of that stuff with Paul's group. And I think we're going to start doing stuff with Jefferson County Open Space as well. So we want to use that fire to restore those natural ecological processes and functions. We want to achieve those land management objectives. When we go out there and meet with anybody we're going to help burn, we want to meet with those land managers first to determine what are their resource objectives. What are they trying to meet? What are they trying to do? Is it elk habitat? Is it truly just fire mitigation? But those are the things we need to discuss when we first meet out there. Okay. And then we need to identify risks of not implementing fuels and prescribed fire actions. I mean, what happens if we don't burn? You know, is burning the right tool all the time? Not necessarily. It's a great tool, but it's maybe not the best tool to use in all instances. And we're going to assess that on every project individually. Okay. So with that, we have a state of Colorado prescribed fire planning and implementation guide. All state agencies adhere to this guide. That's State Land Board, that's Parks and Wildlife, that's State Forest Service, that's DFPC. We utilize this guide to guide us with our planning, our implementation, our risk analysis. We have a statewide all lands prescribed fire and fuels agreement that encompasses all of those agencies, and we stick to this pretty closely. I update this every year if there's any changes. Occasionally, we follow the NWCG planning guide pretty closely. Ours is all based on the NWCG National Wildfire Coordinating Group guide. And occasionally they have changes, and I'll incorporate them into ours. The only difference is with our planning documents and NWCG planning documents is we have broken out notifications in a separate section. NWCG incorporates all of the notification stuff into one deal, and mop up and holding into one. We broke them out separately to be discussed separately so they're understood a little more. So instead of 21 elements, which NWCG has, we have 24. It's all the same stuff, we just have it addressed just a little different. Okay. If anybody wants a copy of this, I am more than happy to send this out. This is a great way if you're trying to get a prescribed fire program started. Look at this document first, contact me. I will be more than happy to help you guys work on setting up programs with this done out there. Okay. So what guides all prescribed fire programs in Colorado? And I should say not all, because the federal government is not bound by our state statutes. They have their own rules that they use. But this is mostly pertaining to all state lands, local lands, either be fire protection districts, county sheriff, or non-governmental organizations, NGOs, such as like the Amber Alliance, who we partner with. So this is what guides us. So the revised statutes for prescribed fire, it's 24, 33.5, 1217. That's the overall CRS, okay? That's it, established the training and certification standards for users of prescribed fire in consultation with Prescribed Fire Council. They are our advisory arm. We use them to guide all of our policies and changes we need. And underneath that, we have 1217.5, 3, and 7. Okay, 5 sets the minimum standards for prescribed fire planning and implementation in the state of Colorado and all qualifications for state agencies, NGOs, and local governmental entities. Okay, this is stuff that hasn't, we've tried to get it out there several times for everybody to understand, but occasionally somebody pops up saying that they don't understand where this came from, and it's been here since about 2014. So this is what everybody needs to be following on the ground as a local or governmental organization. Okay, minimum standards. You need to have a plan that meets at least the NWCG minimums. You know, the planning process and the complexity, and you need to have qualified people to pull off your burn. You got to have a burn boss. You have to have qualified firing bosses and those types of folks to be able to burn on those local agencies, governmental agencies, those types of things. Okay. 1217.3 talks about authority for permitting during drought conditions. And then 17.7 talks about how we deal with escaped prescribed fires in the state. DFPC, whenever there's an escaped fire, we are supposed to be the ones that lead the charge to make sure that there's a review and an investigation done. And that's as a standard. Okay, so quick breakdown of how the statute, how it applies in the state. State and local government and non-governmental organizations who use prescribed fire must either adopt our policy or adopt or have already adopted guidelines or standards that are in compliance with ours. So the NWCG standard. Boulder County built their own program, and they did a very good job of it. But it met the minimum intent. It met the minimum requirements under state law, which is the planning document and the qualifications for folks. Okay. So here are the minimum burning standards. We'll go through these a little bit in detail here. Need to ensure that your burning is in a controlled application of fire to vegetative fuels under specified environmental conditions. That's that prescription. That's those objectives. That's the fire behavior analysis stuff using Behave or whatever program you're using. It's designed to confine the fire to a predetermined area. That's pretty easy. That's all in the planning. Designed to accomplish planned land management objectives. Okay, and it conforms to the statute and rules that are out there at 1217. Okay. Needs to include information on planning, preparing, and implementing safe, effective burning based on NWCG. And that's the big thing. It's based on the NWCG. We didn't reinvent the wheel here. NWCG has been doing this stuff for years. They've got a great minimum standard set for all of those. They're a training arm for all of us in the governmental organizations, anybody who wants to play in wildland fire. So they've really figured out how to do this. Okay. We at the state, though, have to have specific criteria with respect to masticated fuels. Due to lower North Fork after the burning in the mastication, there just need to be special considerations when we're burning masticated fuels. I found that sometimes burning whole tree mastication isn't really very effective anyway, because it's killing residual trees. There's too much heat if it's whole tree. Now, it's a little different than, say, oak. But that's not as bad, but I found that it's just too much heat into the ground with masticated fuels trying to burn that stuff. So I don't know. It's still up in the air on whether they're not that rich or not, I guess. We require, and the law requires, at least one person must be qualified as an NWCG burn boss at the appropriate level. So that's RXB2, burn boss 2 for broadcast burning, and RXB3 or equivalent for pile burn. Okay. U.S. Forest Service doesn't have an RXB3, but they have their own rules and guidelines. We like the RXB3. I think it's a great way to start you out as a burn boss. If you haven't seen the task book, the BLM has a great task book. I also have we created a task book for DFPC based upon the BLM one as well for RXB3. Okay. And we have to establish appropriate guidelines to conduct the burn in accordance with the prescription, okay, and provide adequate protection for the safety of persons and adjacent property. When we are planning, our burn plan requires us to meet with the county sheriff and the local fire protection district to discuss that plan and let them know that it exists and give them the chance to input on it, to help through the planning, to even assist with the burning itself. We like to have the locals involved in the planning stuff. It's way easier to get that local knowledge on the planning side than it is trying to get it out. And that's just a requirement for us at DFPC in the state. You guys don't have to do that if you're setting up a program. I just find it's a lot easier to do that on the front end. We also have to evaluate alternatives to burning. Like I said, burning is not the only treatment out there. Sometimes there's a lot better other ones. Sometimes burning just isn't appropriate. But you have to look and see if there are alternatives to burning. Okay? And then we have to definitely keep our record keeping out there. We need to make sure we have public information campaigns. The public needs to know when we're burning because we need to have that social license. You got to have the public involved. We got to get the word out sooner rather than later. In fact, when you're starting the planning process itself, is probably this time to start your public information campaign. Vail did a great job with theirs. They had stuff out there for months before. They had public meetings, they had input. The people knew it was coming. And that way, when they pulled off the burn, and it wasn't a very big burn, there was smoke in the air and people didn't lose their minds, I guess, because they knew it was going to happen. Okay, get the public involved as much as possible. Okay. So what's this mean for you guys? It means for state and local governments and NGOs, you have to have a prescribed fire policy in place that addresses the issues outlined previously. You can use our planning documents, our guidelines, you can make your own, you can use the NWCG, but you have to have the minimum set, okay, in the state of Colorado. Like I said, this doesn't apply to federal partners, but state, local government, and NGOs. Okay. This also doesn't apply to private folks. We encourage private folks to get the training and the help that they need, but that's where the Ember Alliance can come in, those NGOs, and they're going to know about our guidelines and standards for that. The reason we want you guys to have this is if a prescribed burn escapes and it does go to court, they're going to look at all aspects of the burn. Was it planned properly? Did you have qualified individuals? They're going to take every single thing that you did and determine if it met the minimum standard, the NWCG standard. So I strongly encourage everyone who wants to use prescribed fire, please look at these laws in detail. Have your lawyers, your local lawyers look at it. Come up with your own burn guidelines if you don't like ours or if you don't like the NWCG's, but they have to meet that minimum intent. I keep going back to Vail, but they're one of the very first partners we've had that have incorporated all of this in their program. They've built a pretty robust program that's looking at expanding pretty heavily in the next year or two. But they're meeting that intent. I strongly suggest maybe contacting Paul Cada over there and getting his input as well. Okay, or myself, contact him as well. So what's this mean for us at DFPC? We set the minimum standard defined under the revised statute. We've already done that. Okay. We are not an enforcing agency at DFPC. We're not there to go out and give you guys a ticket for doing anything not under the statute. But please, develop some kind of policy that meets that minimum intent. It's going to save you a lot of headache and heartache in the future if something does go wrong. Okay. We are here to assist you guys at every level. Once again, Vail reached out to me several years ago, to help start building their policy. Get it started now, so then it can be in place. Okay? We're here to help at DFPC. We want everybody to succeed in their program. We want more prescribed fire on the landscape. Please reach out and ask us for help. Email me, call me, touch base with me. We'll help you guys start getting your feet off the ground and figure out how you can develop your program. Okay, we're here to help you as the local folks. Okay, and Jefferson County actually just did, what, 2 weeks ago? Yep. So please, we're here to help. So any questions or assistance needed with prescribed fire stuff? Once again, you can email me. There's my email address at the bottom. I'm going to have a table set up out here too with the Prescribed Fire Council. I'll have some cards. You guys can contact me, whatever you need. So with that, does anybody have any questions? And I'm sure there's going to be plenty here. Maybe.
So on the policy,
Does that need to be a written and approved policy by your governing body, or is that in practice?
It's a policy by practice. Yeah, I mean, it should be approved by probably reviewed by your governing body, you know, to make sure that you would have your chief review it, maybe your city council if you're going through that, possibly a lawyer if you guys have one of those to make sure that it needs to attend. Shut this down, make sure we don't have any stuff in the chat here. Don't see anything yet. Other questions?
Administer the certified burner program.
Yeah.
Yeah, how that got started and what some of your challenges that they've had versus, you know, how many people you signed up and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the certified burner program was the brainchild of the Prescribed Fire Council originally. It was designed really for private landowners, and it's morphed a little since then. It was designed to put a law on the books that would give the private individual a training and certification standard to give them some kind of liability protection under state law if something were to go wrong with the burn. So we've got the 2 levels, certified burner A and B. There's a class involved that you take. It's 2.5 days, roughly 3 days. The first half day being a basic intro to fire behavior, like a very pared down 190. It's really designed for the person that has no practical experience with fire. And then the next 2 days we get into plan writing, how to prepare a plan, what risks look like, how to actually implement the burn. And once again, it was really designed for the private landowner, but it's morphed into a lot of fire protection districts are sending folks and other agencies because it gives people an introduction to plan writing, which is something that was sorely needed a lot of places. I have folks come from all over different states to come take our class. I've had many guys from Texas, New Mexico, some of those places come and look. Once the class is done, they have to do 3 training burns. They have a little task book they have to complete. Once those are done, all the stuff is sent in to me, all the information, and then we certify them or tell them they need more experience or something, and then we keep the database. I think right now we have 20, I'd have to look at the notes, certified burner Bs, which is just pile burning, and I think 7 burner A's now. I can't remember that. It's right around 10, if I remember correctly. It might be one of them. It's for broadcast. There's, the challenges with it. We were having issues getting folks to even just come to the class to start with. And now when we do have a class, which we weren't able to have any of this last year because of COVID, just couldn't, just was impossible. We're having 30 people show up almost every time. We're having some challenges getting folks to complete the certification, and I don't know why that is. They take the class, everybody's gung ho, they go, and then they just kind of trickle in. They do trickle in, but it's slower paced than I would have thought it would have been. But they do trickle in. We do have a lot of folks out there taking the class, so that seems to be a challenge, and I'm not sure why. But it's a good program. It's a good class, for sure. And even if you just want to be an RSP3 and not a certified burner, just taking the class and learning that planning process, it's huge. Because there's really no class out there that teaches how to write a burn plan. Because it is an art to write a plan.
How often are these classes put on?
Well, how often are the classes put on is a question. Before COVID, we were offering one at the Spring Academy, one at the Winter Academy, and then 3 to 4 classes around the state throughout the year. but when COVID happened, that imploded. We looked at doing some virtual stuff that never worked out well. There's just so much hands-on with it. It's really hard to do a virtual class with certified burner. Even with the group, you know, there's so much group work in just hands-on types of information that it just didn't, it was hard to do. We are planning for this fall, pending the COVID restrictions. If those come about again, I'm not sure. Probably somewhere northern Colorado, one in Colorado Springs. I think we're gonna one in Vail now, and then one in the southwest part of the state. And we usually take, like I said, up to 30 folks with the class. We're not there to make money on a class, so it's around $30 to take it. We're just trying to cover the cost of the book and the materials because they are pretty expensive to make. But $30 for a, you know, liability coverage is pretty good expense, I think.
For the training birds, is it same like any training position where you have to work as a qualified?
No. So you can do those yourself as a private individual. The law was written very loosely that way. But we're just spread so thin. It's hard to put people out there to help you. You can call your regional battalion chief of the FPC for assistance. You can contact me if there's somebody available. But there's no requirements that you have to have a training. Just if you don't, then you have all the documentation you could possibly get of what happened, smoke permitting and weather and everything, and then submit all that. And that's the other, I think that's one of the bigger issues with the program itself is you are not covered in any way, shape, or form for liability until you complete your training birds and become certified. And that might be why I'm not getting some of the folks to complete it. It's a good possible.
Once you become certified, is there
Yeah, you have to do at least 2 burns every 5 years, submit that paperwork, and then submit a recertification document to me, and then get you certified.
Is there a minimum pile number? Like, does one pile count?
One pile counts, yes, there's no minimum for that. As long as it's a pile that you wrote a plan for, you got a smoke permit for, you contacted your fire protection district, your sheriff, or whoever your smoke permitting agency is, and you've done all of the groundwork.
Okay.
or do you have a couple of questions in the chat?
No, we have to have presenter repeat the questions. They can't hear them. I'll start doing that. Let's see. What do we think about hosting out-of-state folks in the trainings? They're establishing a program, it looks like, from Arizona and Utah. Folks from all over come to our classes, from all different states. Said I've had folks from New Mexico come already, some from Wyoming, Texas. I think I had some folks from South Dakota a couple years ago as well. So yeah, there's more. It's a very state-specific certified burner program for Colorado, so it's going to be very state-centered for here, but it would definitely give folks from out of state an idea of what they should be doing for planning as well. Other questions?
Where will you get the information about the classes coming up?
So we'll be posting those on our DFPC website. That'll go out. It'll go out on our DFPC Facebook, social media. I don't even know what all we have. I don't use a lot of social media. So, but it'll go out on all of that. We'll also give it to the fire protection district in the county, and we'll get it out there as much as we can. We encourage folks to share that stuff if they see come across on ours as well. I'll give it to Fire DAP in Colorado to share, in other places like that. Yeah.
Just got one clarification, just to mention, you said that there's no prescribed fire training. There actually is.
Yeah, that's for there's no necessarily pile burn. Yeah.
RS 341.
Yeah.
So to fill it,
Yeah. Right, yeah, 301 and 341 are out there. They're very Fed-centric classes though. They're not very, this class is designed more for the local person, not so much the large scale practitioner, I guess. Good clarification, thank you.
If we have more questions, we'll have time at the end of the session. Pretty much on schedule. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and we'll be right back. Thanks.
What's it?
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, it's Rod. Can you hear me? No.
We can hear you now.
Yes, go ahead.
I was just curious how many people you had in the room.
15?
15 to 20, I didn't count.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Okay, I'm gonna go get a cup of water and be back.
Yeah, me too. Bye.
We qualify people. Programs. All of the work that we've got, of course, that basically provides that becomes a problem, especially in the fall. So all of it. Yeah. We have, you know, like when we did it, but yeah, it's like, well, we want to get for us to spread out without having, and right, my chief, I think, rolled out this, where they actually were being paid so, absolutely, yeah, it's just, you get it, you're getting a reason to talk, and this is. Oh, right. So, Well. Well, it's a lot. Hey. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I look at it. Yeah, I just didn't know. I'm still interested. What I'll tell you, like, I started asking those questions. Oh, well, okay, every time. Oh, yeah. We do primarily not a lot of a level. Can't blow them, can't do it. We do. But no, we do it. Yeah, pretty much. Oh,
Mute is off. You guys hear me? Is Kirk?
I don't know. Or at least it seems like planning. Oh, no, totally. It seems like it's been a long time. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Lasky, are you presenting?
Kirk, yeah, I'm ready to present when everybody else is.
Okay, just a couple more minutes, I think.
Yeah, no rush.
Yeah.
Okay, Kirk, you want to see if anybody's hanging in the hall there? We got most folks back, and I appreciate your attention this morning, and I hope we're addressing at least some things you want to think about. I'm not sure how many of you actually have a program and how many are thinking about it. So let me ask that basic question. How many of you are involved or manage prescribed fire program? Okay, just a scatter. So, okay, so that's good to know for our speakers. I think the next couple of sessions should be, the first two were pretty much, here's what you got to do requirement wise for DLPC and for air quality. And the next couple of sessions are more, I think, the reality of what you face and try to do. So with that, Dave, can you take it off here? Okay, sure.
Yep.
We
Can everyone hear me?
can hear you, but I'm trying to change the screen here.
Great, thank you.
Can you share your screen?
I'm having some bandwidth issues, so I'm gonna ask Daniel Godwin to share his screen with the presentation.
Yeah, stand by.
Okay, we're standing by. We're getting closer. Is everybody in here from Colorado? Is there anyone in here not from Colorado? Oh, cool. Where are you from? Utah. Utah? Okay. And okay, well, Utah. You guys together? Or? Oh, okay, good. Cool. So that will make Gloria happy that we're reaching out to our neighbors.
Is that screen share working for y'all?
Okay, we're good.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. All right, Dave, back to you.
Okay, you're on. Okay, Dave, you ready?
Stand by one. Let me check in with him.
So this relates to what Kirk was saying, it's so much better. While we're waiting, does anybody have just a general question about some of the prescribed fire topic? Trying to get this going.
So is there a repository of escape fires? Lessons learned, is there a place to go for that?
Yeah, the Lessons Learned Center through NWCG has a lot of information. They do, they do their, I'll call it after action view, but it's a different type. But anyway, they go through significant escape fires and look at, how did they get to that point? What was the response? So yeah, the Lessons Learned Center. But that's where I would start.
And is there the NBC reps over?
Step out.
Again, the question about, so the NBC's obviously invested incredible amounts of technology in drones.
Right.
And whether in the curriculum, striving for the certified learning stuff, is there requirements for some drone?
All right. Apologies for that. Can everybody hear me all right now?
Yeah, stand by 1 second. We're
Yep.
having one quick discussion and then we'll be ready. So the course that the FPC teaches doesn't really focus on plans and it specifically address the use of drones. That said, if you want to put that in your plan, just remember that whatever you put in your plan, it's in your plan. So if you put that in there, you've got to make sure that it's available. And if it's not available, and that's a key component of your plan, you're not in very good shape. And my experience has been that when the window's open and everybody wants to burn, some of those specialized tools are highly desirable and are hard to locate. So just a cautionary.
Yeah, no, we have a pretty expensive program.
Okay.
FPC certified. I would just say that I'm quite surprised every day. Has its return.
Cool.
So the latest kind of 75-acre fire that we had, and after the type 4 previously, burned it, just when it was turned back over to us,
Right.
we drone the perimeter. Hotspots right on the perimeter. It's, I think it's really, it's more and more sold by the technology. On how your message really, essentially, one of those, I think, stumble that, so it's almost, I'd almost consider it almost negligent if we weren't doing that with infrared. Because it certainly takes the human element out of the firefighting.
Yeah.
And just provides that additional means to make sure escape fires and liable.
Yeah, that's a interesting point of discussion we can get into when we get into the bigger discussion time. Okay, so are we all set here on the Zoom call? Dave?
Yep, I'm ready to go, and I think Daniel's got the presentation up on the screen for everyone.
Yes.
Great. All right. Well, I'll jump in. Apologies for the technical difficulties. My name is Dave Lasky. I'm the Fire Management Officer for the Ember Alliance, and I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about the nonprofit organization perspective on prescribed fire. And at least for the Ember Alliance, we see it, at least in part of our mission is to really fill the gap, and fill the gap between work that isn't getting done by other organizations who are all doing great work on their jurisdiction, but there's some spots, important chunks of the landscape that are left out. Next slide. And so the Ember Alliance is a Colorado-based nonprofit, and the mission of the Ember Alliance is to create a fire resilient society that supports people, landscapes, and the planet. And I also want to kind of call out right from the get-go that I know there are other folks in the room today, both from the Nature Conservancy as well as Daniel Godwin from the Ember Alliance, and I suspect other nonprofits as well, who are already who have really led the way on doing great prescribed fire as a nonprofit organization. And so this is just really one perspective, and hopefully some of those folks will be able to contribute during the question and answer. Next slide. So the Ember Alliance is really built to address the needs predominantly on private lands, but also on county and state lands in some states, to provide the fire management planning, training, and then ultimately implementation and treatment of prescribed fire, with the hope of really being one tool in the toolbox for folks to see prescribed fire increase in pace and scale. Next slide. And so, speaking at least for our experience as an NGO, doing this work as a nonprofit is honestly really pretty hard. And we're really looking to get the work done where other agencies or organizations can't, or sometimes won't work. Generally, it's really can't. As we all know, fire is a very jurisdictionally driven industry. And so particularly on private lands in most places, including Colorado, I think, there's a real challenge for federal, state, and even local fire departments to feel either comfortable or empowered to work on private lands. And so I think we all agree that, we have to be working on private land to be addressing our WUI issues. And so the NGO model is really a hybrid between the federal and state agency models, suppression models that many of us in the NGO community kind of cut our teeth and came up through a suppression fire training and experience base, and really hybridizing that with a bit of a private contractor ability to operate and work independently, not driven by really not being driven by jurisdictional obligations. So that's the upside of working with a nonprofit, is they're not really linked to a single jurisdiction. Next slide. And so really for I think this probably goes for all of us, but particularly in the NGO space, everything we do starts with multi-stakeholder planning. And I can't stress this enough, but as a nonprofit, we never have the resources we need. We never have the funding we need. We never have the social license we need to work alone and independently. And so I believe all nonprofits have really built a skill set around multi-stakeholder planning and bringing in the community, other nonprofits, other local, state, and federal agencies. And it really makes for a much more collaborative fire management process, which I think is exciting and is in keeping with some of the trends that we see a lot of our governmental as well as non-governmental agencies kind of want to go. Next slide. And so, you know, again, I'm going to keep returning to this. Close partnerships really are what lead to success. And obviously this slide is mostly from work that's been done on Colorado's Front Range or in the Rio Grande area of New Mexico and around Santa Fe predominantly. So you can see the diversity of groups that nonprofits are able to hopefully interface with and cross a lot of silos and barriers. Next slide. And so one of the things I'd encourage folks who are thinking about standing up a fire program is really to think about this question of scale. And at what scale are you trying to start work and ultimately accomplish work at? And so there's as Kirk was talking earlier, there's a big distinction between the requirements, the complexity, the consequences, and the costs of doing slash pile burning versus doing broadcast burning. And so I think that it's important early on that folks clarify which or both they're trying to do, because there are very different requirements and you wind up kind of wearing different hats when talking with the community. I also, you know, I think again, we all agree, but I think it bears mention that our fuels treatments really aren't complete until fire is reintroduced. And so I think where we have historically seen in some cases, at least on private lands, fire being a separate phase, we really believe fire just needs to be part of the phase. And I think the challenge to the group and certainly to big parts of Colorado is when working in the WUI, can we figure out a cost-effective way, a scalable way to do high frequency, small scale burning, which is going to be high touch, high partner engagement, high planning costs, but has the potential of putting treated rings around our communities, which we know will reduce fire intensity in the event of a wildfire. Next slide. And so it really is, and this is a map of a project where you can see we have both a pile unit, which is hopefully expected to be a broadcast unit after the piles are burned, in this kind of barrier idea around WUI structures. And doing this kind of burning is really challenging. It is a different kind of risk profile. And so it can only happen with really intense collaboration from partners at all levels. Next slide. And this is a little bit of a soapbox, I guess, but I think we've seen, particularly with the pile backlog on the Front Range of Colorado and New Mexico, that we've built a lot of piles without necessarily having a plan for how we're really going to burn them. So I am in no way saying that we shouldn't be doing treatment. I think we need to double down and do, you know, quadruple the treatment we're doing. But I think it's critical that we just can't build piles if we don't have a plan, the funding, and the resources lined up to burn it. And these don't have to be internal resources. There are lots of partners who can participate. Next slide. And so the planning process we've found really is a long game, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this as well. We have to prepare ourselves and our partners that our impacts aren't always immediate. I really think social license, you know, unfortunately, because of events like the Camp Fire, social license is getting better, but I think it's still really inconsistent. And again, it's inconsistent at all levels, from the homeowner on through the fire protection district up through other stakeholders like the insurance agency or insurance industry. And so I think where I've seen things shift perhaps in a positive way is I'm not sure anybody likes prescribed fire any more today than they did 15 years ago. They've just really gotten to a place where they're really done losing houses. And so prescribed fire has an opportunity where it didn't previously. I also would encourage folks to really think about places where the WUI and watersheds overlap. We're seeing more and more focus and priority, and in turn funding, flowing into areas where these two things overlap, but it also has the double-edged impact of there are some very high barriers to implementation, like you've heard both Kirk as well as Boyd talk about a little bit. And so I think when looking at that planning process, the awareness that every partner will have different needs and very different risk tolerances. And we can get these to align, and we can work with partners and find their appropriate place kind of in this mosaic of organizations working together. But it has to come with this perspective that there are different needs and risk tolerances that are unlikely to change over the arc of a single project. Next slide. Also, for a nonprofit, operational resources can be a real challenge. Currently, the bulk of fire funding still flows into suppression. Most organizations that I'm aware of that are doing prescribed fire at scale have a much larger suppression arm that really buffers a lot of the costs associated with doing prescribed fire. They're acquiring equipment to do suppression. Most folks are being paid to do suppression and are able to do prescribed fire as a secondary assignment. And so this is an issue for everyone to think about is how can you fund the long-term maintenance and replacement of equipment, training of individuals and personnel who may or may not have access to suppression opportunities. And without those access to suppression opportunities, it's hard to work through task books and build up a skill set. Next slide. I know Rod's going to talk about this a little bit too, but certainly one of the things that all of our partners immediately go to is what's the risk? And right now, getting insurance to do prescribed fire implementation is extremely difficult. There are pockets of entities like land trusts who are able to get prescribed fire insurance for their own land. In many cases, ranchers are able to get prescribed fire coverage through their farm and ranch policy. But working particularly in the WUI, perhaps for some commonsensical reasons, the insurance industry, particularly post-COVID, has no appetite for risk for burning at scale in the WUI. And so that's an issue that has to be addressed before contemplating really leaning in on doing this kind of work. Another way of working on risk, I do think, is by co-managing it with partners and strong agreements that help spread the obligation, but also bond partners together and build relationships so that there are strong relationships in place before something unfortunate happens. And then, Kirk can speak to this if there are questions, but in Colorado, while we have very strong state statute, I think it's worth mentioning that statute is, as far as I know, still currently unchallenged and unproven in the legal system. And so we don't know entirely how gross negligence will protect the burn boss or their organization. Next slide. And so in terms of cost, I really think it's important that acres are not our only metric. And I think we need to continue to work with our funders and our partners to drive the conversation beyond just quantity of acres treated and think about the complexity of working in places like the WUI drives cost. But with that increased cost comes with perhaps treating the right acres, not just the easy acres. And so this is, again, one of those dualities that's tough to address. But but I think is critical for us to move forward as an industry and for folks to think about when they're standing up their own programs. How are you going to be able to pay and find funders who will support doing smaller acreage, but more complex and hopefully more impactful burning? Next slide. And then lastly, and hopefully this will leave plenty of time for questions and conversation, there are some advantages to being a nonprofit. One of the places where I think nonprofits really can support other partners is in access to non-traditional workforces. We do, as well as many other partner nonprofits do, lots of work in conjunction with conservation corps, with adult volunteer groups. We work with partners like the Boy Scouts who bring other types of volunteers to bear. And I think as we continue to see a suppression season stretch out longer and longer and longer, being able to bring in other folks into the prescribed fire workforce is a key component. And so this means volunteer firefighters who may not be going out on suppression assignment, but could be available for local work. And then I think it's last, really worth stressing that working with a non-suppression workforce does not immediately mean that there's any reduction in risk management or in standards employed. And so conservation corps and many of these volunteer groups are ready, willing, and interested in working with DFPC, for example, to get trained in pile burning, to work with volunteer fire departments, municipal departments, NGOs to get their 130, 190. And so there are a lot of opportunities out there as we pivot away from just using our suppression, our suppression agencies and employees to do the work. So I guess at that, I'd like to switch it back to screen share and hopefully have oh, sorry. Thank you, Daniel. One last slide. So, and this is what I meant to conclude on, is I think there is a lot of conversation about that the Southeast has this culture of fire. They never lost their culture of fire. And that's what the Intermountain West wants to aspire to. And I guess I would maybe conclude with that question of, I don't know that the Southeast is or isn't a fair proxy for what we want to do and are currently doing in the Intermountain West. What I will say is I think the Southeastern region rather really has demonstrated how non-federal workers are getting a lot of work done on the ground, both contractors as well as state agencies and other organizations. We all know that there's difference in terrain, weather, fuel type, number of entries in a given stand. So I think there's lots of challenges in terms of comparing the model, but I think it's a really important perspective that we continue to ask ourselves, how do the successes in the Southeast reflect on a new model that we can employ in Colorado and other Western states? Now I really am done.
All right, questions for Dave? I guess you're,
Paul's got one. I got a question.
yeah.
Hey, Dave, Paul Gator, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you, Paul.
Hey, so you talked about the alternative metric of success. What other ways besides acres do you measure success?
Yeah, so I think certainly one of the ways to measure it is in terms of homes potentially protected. And again, it is hard to sell prevention, but I do think we need to be using, for many of us have agencies with very evolved GIS folks, and looking at both structures protected, critical infrastructure protected, evacuation routes that are preserved. And then also, as we see, at least on the Front Range, organizations like Denver Water looking at fire impacts on things like their distribution system and how sedimentation post-fire is exceedingly costly for a water provider. I think we can be looking at all types of infrastructure and watershed preservation by burning in areas where we know the fire modeling shows the potential for great impact and rapid spread. So I think we need to be using metrics that are about quality, not just quantity, if that seems like a straight answer.
Any other questions? You got one in the chat.
Yeah, so I guess, I think how far away are we showing protection on communities? I think that's to some extent, a metric that is open to interpretation. I'll invite Daniel to talk about this a little bit if you'd like. But certainly one of the things that I think we can look at is new tools like EmberCast modeling. And if we can demonstrate that treating the landscape is reducing EmberCast impact, then I think we could call those homes positively treated. Similarly, I think if we can show that work, regardless of how far away, is really preserving evacuation routes, I think that could be successfully counted. But I guess, again, I'll either Daniel or Emily or Parker, who also work for NGOs, thoughts on some of this stuff.
Yeah, I think there's kind of weak and strong versions of this that we could talk about. And as you say, Angela, do you have to run a bunch of fire models to process the assumptions to figure this out? Or do we want to do kind of is it a WUI acre or not? Or is it in a like a high priority fire shed or any kind of number of ways we could go about this? I think that's something as a practitioner community, it would be good for us to come out with some collaboratively determined metrics around this, that in the same way that the State Forest Service has gone through this big process to determine what are the priority subwatersheds for treatment. Then there's a bunch of different things that goes into that. How should we define high priority WUI treatment areas, and what are the metrics we want to go about for this? And then tying things like connecting that to some of our larger funding sources like Restore or the REMRI work that's going on, so that we're all kind of playing off the same sheet of music, talking about the same things that we're measuring. Because if you look at a NIFWIF grant, right, and I apologize for the background noise, there's a skid steer outside my window working on the curb. NIFWIF grants have like very defined metrics around where treatment connects to of any kind. If you're restoring mule deer habitat or whatever, they've got drop down window or menus around this. If we can get to a point where we can do that for the right acre versus just any old acre, I think that's the trick here, where we can get all to it.
Yeah, that's a really complex, good luck figuring that out. If I look at it from watersheds, what acre in Colorado is vegetated in a watershed? How much of that, if that upper reaches of the watershed go up in smoke, what does that mean? That's the houses are, a little more like, there's $1 million house here. The watersheds, when it's out in the pine country, water people understand it, but I think the public perception, even with the floods that are happening right up the road here, closing the interstate, I still don't think the public understands impacts of wildfire on watersheds. Okay, thank you, guys. I think we'll run on to the next speaker, Rod Moraga. And Rod is the chair of this Colorado Prescribed Fire Council. Known Rod for a while, and he's been around fire for quite some time. And he's going to talk about it as he has a company. He can talk about his challenges and opportunities. Are you here, Rod?
I am, thank you. I'm gonna,
We're not seeing you. There a second. There we are. Okay.
are you seeing me?
We're seeing your slides. It'd be nice.
How about now?
Yeah, you're good. Just
Okay.
put it in presenter mode if you can.
Yeah,
There you go.
Perfect.
That works.
yeah. I'm gonna take a step back just to talk a little bit more broadly. I am the chairperson of the Colorado Prescribed Fire Council, so I would like to thank everybody who showed up for this, both virtually and in person. I think it's really important that we continue this effort and movement to get more acres, treated, to get more fire on the ground, to get people comfortable with it, to have people understand why we do what we do. If you read the news about fires, which I'm sure you all do, it's interesting to me how almost every article at some point mentions the fact that what we need is more prescribed fire, not less. And I think that gives us a huge opportunity. We need to take advantage of this. We need to, strike. Nah, I won't say it. That's too much of a pun. We need to take advantage of a positive, message that we have. Hopefully, more understanding as to why it's important and more tolerance for us to do it. The WUI attracts the most attention when we look at values at risk. When we think about, what are we really protecting? Depending on your agency, your first mandate and objective may be the resource. And that is absolutely great. And I support that 100%. However, a lot of the fire departments, the local folks, their main directive is to save homes and lives and values at risk. And so that WUI component becomes incredibly important. And, I'll just dive into my background a little bit. I started with the U.S. Forest Service, but I moved to Boulder and became a ranger here. But as part of that, I was also the forest and fire ecologist. I also helped to start the prescribed fire program in Boulder. And through the course of that, we learned that we had to start with baby steps. And for, since that is the topic we're really discussing here, is starting a program. Don't get greedy, and you got to walk before you can run. And depending on the area you're in, that can mean many different things. In Boulder, I still remember when we burned 10 acres of grass, and there was over 150 of us there. We surrounded that thing. We held hands around it. We must have had, I'm not exaggerating, 12, 15 engines there. That's what needed to happen in order to make everyone comfortable. You're going to need to not only convince the public, but more than likely, you're going to need to convince your bosses. If this isn't something you already do, trust me, going to your boss and tell them, hey, what do you think about burning stuff? They're not going to jump out of their seat for that. It's a high risk proposition. There are all sorts of political ramifications to when you do this kind of work. Again, varies by where you are in the state, but anywhere up and down the Front Range, for instance, we have to do a lot of legwork to put fire on the ground. It's not a casual affair, nor should it be. Again, values at risk. So, I just want everybody to consider that you have to be patient. You may not see it in your lifetime, frankly. Personally, after I left the city, the Boulder Fire Department now has a dedicated wildland division, of which there's a prescribed fire component to that. And now they have a station and everything. I never got to see any of that. You know, there were 3 of us, and we did what we could. So you're doing it for the good of the effort, not for yourself. So keep that in mind. And so with that, I just want to say that, you know, this is something I know quite a bit about, you know, having had the experience of starting something from the ground up. And through that career, I've been also involved in many prescribed burns with other agencies all around the country. I've taught ignition classes and fire behavior classes and everything to do with the hope of, you know, continuing this ability for folks to go out and do good things and burn. And that's always been my objective in my career. So after the Boulder Fire Department, I went on to consulting, which is what I do now. So, you know, I now do this privately, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. Some of my other background is just I'm a fire behavior analyst, a long-term analyst, a prescribed fire burn boss too. And another thing that folks have touched on, and I'll touch on it again, but fire investigation and expert witness. And I'll talk to you about why what you do and how you do it is so incredibly important in the legal world, which is a lot of what my world is. So I'll begin by saying who are my clients? In the private sector, the people who come to us seem to be, interestingly, you know, large ranches say that have either tried themselves and not had good luck. You know, in other words, something escaped them and it scared the hell out of them. And now they're thinking, maybe we should get more professional people to do this for us. Sometimes it's people who are being sort of forced into it. And, you know, that's never a good relationship, I just have to say, because, you know, in my case, this is for profit. I don't deny that in any way. I'm not going to go out there and burn for the fun of it. I do that when people invite me to agency burns, I get to go have fun. But, and, you know, if it's for the company, we have to make a profit. And when people are not eager to do it, that, you know, it's not worth it. Typically, they reach out to other folks first. So we're not the first call they make. We're usually the last call they make. Everyone else has turned them down. And so right from the beginning, you know, it's not going to be the easiest burn. I'm going to talk about complexity, but, you know, if they're calling us, they've sort of run out of options that were the easy way. And so now they're having to call someone else to help them. So, and then one of the biggest things that we fight is the fact that there is this mantra in prescribed fire, and I used to do it when I was with the agency. We tell everybody how prescribed burning is the cheapest, most effective way to do land management. And, you know, if I could see you all, I'd ask you to raise your hands if you've heard that or said that yourselves. But the truth is, I learned it when I left an agency, is that prescribed fire is not as cheap as we all think it is. And I'll go into that a little bit. So some of the major considerations for me, whenever I do this kind of work, is the liability, right? I have to weigh the risk versus reward. That's where it starts. Insurance, we're going to talk about. You know, what's the amount of resources and equipment that I'm going to need to get this thing done? How complex is this project? And at the end of the day, is it going to be profitable? And I've been doing this long enough where I can typically tell pretty quickly whether or not it's worth it. And then if it is, then I can use a spreadsheet to actually figure out, you know, what I'm going to make in terms of profit. But I'll cut to the chase. I don't make a whole lot of money burning. It's not the greatest part of what we do at our company in terms of profits, but I enjoy it and I feel it's important. So anyway, liability. So, you know, I didn't get a breakdown of who we have in the audience, so I apologize. I know there's at least one person who's private, but the rest of you may all be agency folks. And so this may just be of, you know, interest to you at best, but you're not really thinking about it in the same way. when you go out to help, on an agency burn, very few of you, except for the handful at the top of the organization, are really thinking too much about liability. You're covered. That's the beauty of it, right? You work for an agency, they got your workman's comp, and anything else that happens to the engines or whatnot has insurance, and there's not a lot to worry about. Even if you are one of the top people in the organization, like the burn boss or the holding boss or etc. Now there are cases, and we know that there is an opportunity that you could be sued, and it has happened. And I know that certainly federal folks, they have gotten personal insurance when they do some of this work to cover themselves. But by and large, it's not the case. For the most part, we are typically covered, and people are less apt to try to sue a government agency as opposed to a private company. All right, so people aren't going to hesitate to sue a private company. So with that in mind, we got to think about potential property damage and loss, right? So all this goes to the risk reward. Injuries or death, we can't ignore that fact. That's a harsh reality of our job. Equipment damages, right? And then obviously if the fire were to escape and become a wildland fire, all those suppression costs are going to me. No two ways around that. So that's a lot to consider before you light a match. Then there's insurance. Now, there's been some discussion throughout this about insurance. I think Dave did a pretty good job of sort of giving what it was available right now. And the bottom line is it's not. You frankly, in Colorado, I want to be really clear now, not other states. In Colorado, I wouldn't say there is no way to get covered, but it would be extremely expensive. And in my opinion, I have had numerous different policies in the 20 years that I've been doing this. I don't believe any one of them adequately covered me if I had an accident of some kind or an escape. I've had things where, the people out of like Oklahoma were covering us. But, in Oklahoma, it's a totally different idea of burning there. And, it's agricultural type of burning, it's fields. And so they said they covered me, but when I really looked at the details, I didn't want to test that policy. Another interesting policy we had was under construction. Someone, we would use a broker, and they said, look, you can use this general contractor's construction policy to cover you for prescribed burning. And again, I was like, yeah, I don't want to test that one either. The other trick is that a lot of these policies require you to predict, if you will, how many burns you will do. And the policy cost is based on that. So as you can imagine, that becomes pretty difficult because as I said, people don't, we're not the same as your agencies where you're like, hey, let's make a 5-year plan of all the burns we're going to do. And so next year we plan on burning A, B, C, and D. That's not how it works in the private. In the private, you get a phone call from someone and you could get it today and they want it burned tomorrow. And, we have to explain to them how long it takes. But my point is, I don't know how many burns I'll do in a year. And then even if I do have X number of burns on the books, I may not actually implement them because of, weather, smoke, what have you. And so that becomes incredibly difficult. And so there's just no cost-effective way to have good coverage, get insurance privately. And I think, that is something that I am trying to look for solutions to, because I think this, a lot of what Dave Lasky said about his program can be mirrored to the private sector. We are just another option for you. The NGOs are probably more cost effective because they are nonprofits and they get money. We don't get that. But there's also not enough of anyone to go around. And so I think the private sector does have a role here. Certainly we do, because I've been doing it. But you know, we've got to come up with a way to feel more comfortable when we're doing these kinds of jobs. So that leads me to the Colorado Certified Burner Certification, and Kirk obviously spoke on that issue. And you know, the important part of all those statutes that Kirk was showing you, to me, is that a landowner or the landowner's designee who is certified in the division as a certified burner qualified, is therefore also covered. And Kirk and I have spoken on this many times. Their attorney has had good conversations. And right now, that is the best option for a private person to do this burning. Now, with that said, we haven't tested it. And like all of this stuff, you know, when the rubber hits the road, if you will, if and when there were a case before the courts, we would find out just how good this coverage really is and whether or not it holds up. Now, within that, you know, there's always those little disclaimers there, right? So not liable if you follow all the applicable state laws, ordinances, So in a way, it's a positive to me because it even when I have what I would call a simple burn, I have to go through the entire process of, you know, the development of the plan and a full plan that you know, Kirk reviews. And so you can't shortcut. If somebody says, hey, can you come over here and burn 5 acres for me of, you know, ag grass? And I could say, sure, I could probably do that, you know, with two people. But no, I have to do all of what I have to do. And so the price of that burn goes up very quickly, right? This person has been told, oh, it's really cheap, get someone to burn it. Well, you know, if they're in Kansas or Nebraska, that's true. You know, anyone with a little, you know, tender on the back of their truck and a drip torch can go and burn. You can't do that in Colorado. So we're required to do more, therefore there's an expense to that. But at this moment, Kirk, I am very grateful that we have this program because it's the only way I'm able to burn. So when I have to burn, when we put something together, I show this picture and you know, the next one, because this is what we're all used to, right? Hundreds of folks, every one of these vehicles, they're all paid for by the agencies. They're all sort of covered. And when you do burns, as I did, don't get me wrong, you invite everyone as a training opportunity and you don't have to pay them for the most part. For the most part, I know there are some, you know, folks that do charge and so on, but for the most part, you can get a lot of free labor. Well, when you were doing this privately, unfortunately, every single person that you see there and every single vehicle that you see there has to get paid. So now you start to understand that the true cost of prescribed fire is a little bit higher than we all pretend it is. We have to think about minimum resource requirements. In order for me to stay within coverage, I have to meet the minimum requirements, standards set forth by NWCG and the state, which the state, you know, defaults to NWCG. So that means, again, from a cost effectiveness, you know, angle, I look at a little simple unit and I say, man, you know, one brush truck and 3 of us could get this done. Well, that's not acceptable under NWCG, so we have to staff up higher to meet that minimum. The other thing is, I'll be very candid with you, I don't want to work at the minimum. You know, I teach a lot of prescribed fire classes and I don't tell people, hey, get away with the little as you can. No, I teach the opposite. I say, always over order, always have a backup, right? If you need 2 engines, order 4, because you know one's going to break down, you're going to need the one. So, you know, this is the difficulty that there is in the private sector, is that challenge of, you know, how do I make this cost effective? Because at some point when I tell the client what it's going to cost to do it, you know, they're going to see a number and say, wow, I had no idea, right? But I can't skim because this is not the kind of work you skimp on. We got to think about how many days it's going to take. Patrol and mop up. These are things I learned, by the way, on, on the job training. One of the first burns I did, we gave them a bid, and I just, all of a sudden realized, oh, we're going to have to patrol this for like 4 days. Well, I hadn't considered that in my bid, so I learned as I went. Contingency for overtime, right? We all know how that goes. And so if I've got X number of people committed for this burn and, things are taking longer than they should, and we're going to be here till late at night, well, that all has to get paid for. So I'm just giving you a sense of real costs here, of what it really takes to do this work. So again, when we add up the hours of what a prescribed fire costs to implement, and again, look at all these engines here. Do you really consider all this stuff that I've listed, right? I have to, because again, every hour is accounted for in a private company. So site visits, right? How many times have some of you walked your burn site? How many times have you gone up there and said, hey, can you come with me? I want to show you what we're burning. Okay. So, and you do it again and again and again. And if you're a good burn boss, you do it again and again and again, because, you want to be really confident in what you're doing. Well, every hour that you do that needs to be accounted. Writing the burn plan, as I mentioned. Well, those burn plans, again, it doesn't matter if I'm burning 1 acre of grass or 20 acres of forest, I have to write the same burn plan, and it takes time, and it has to be reviewed, and it has to be changed if necessary. You have to do all the fire behavior runs in it. You have to do mapping for it. There's a lot to do for a burn plan. You have to get all your permits. Then there's all the logistics, and I'm speaking in terms of hours here. The logistics is basically keeping in touch with the client, understanding access. What are my restrictions? When can and can't I burn with you? Holding their hand, quite frankly, as you go through this process. That kind of stuff has to happen. So coordinating with agencies, and I'll talk about that. One of the ways that we can reduce costs is by working with the local agencies to have them come and help on the burn the same way you all do with each other. We tried to make that happen as another training opportunity, but that has its own challenges, and we'll talk about that in a second. But again, equipment, what am I going to need? What's the minimum? What do I really want? Find a balance in there. Another thing that really costs you money, I can tell you from many experience, is rescheduling. Sometimes we don't get the window we need, and so we've spooled everybody up, and now we got to cancel. And that may sound not that big a deal, but sometimes when you're traveling, as I do, and you're paying for everyone's travel, by the way, and lodging, and now you're all prepared to burn that morning, and because of either weather or smoke dispersal or what have you, we have to cancel. Well, all those people got to get paid for that day, or half that day, or whatever you put in a contract, but you got to think about those things. So again, those things are all costs. So, is it worth it, right? I mean, there's a bit of a negative tone perhaps to what I'm saying, but it's a reality, and it's something that you, as a private company, when you're really considering the risk that you are taking to do this job, you really have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And I do that individually. On each burn, I have to really consider whether or not I want to take this risk. So how do I reduce the costs? Using available technology. What does that mean? That means Google Earth. It means if the client has a drone or something, I ask them to send me video, pictures, whatever they can do to give me as much upfront information that is going to save him money and me time to going to his or her site to do a recon. I recognized really early on that personally, we are not going to take on forest burns. It's just not cost effective because I won't burn a forest, fuel type without having to check on it on daily for several days after I've done it, right? So there's just this patrol and mop up cost that's kind of usually prices you right out. Plus, you obviously need a lot more resources and equipment to do that properly because of the risks that are involved with that. So I tend to stick with grass and shrub mixes where I have a good perimeter and a fairly low possibility of escape and or a low possibility of damage from escape. In other words, it's a grass model. Even if it does run up against the house, it's not going to burn the house down, and again, and it's also easier to blackline or mitigate, the perimeters. So that's one thing we do. Conservative burn windows, right? So I'm not going to push my luck. We're going to burn really on the edge of what works for us. Typically, I burn a lot in the winter or early spring. I try to keep on top of the weather if I see there's a storm coming, and Boyd alluded to that. It also helps with the smoke issue. But if I know, I've burned a few times where the snow starts to fall as we finish, and that to me is perfection, right? Because that makes me feel better, and we know that we don't have to worry about escape. I only do one-day projects. I mean, I will do multi-day projects, but each unit within that will be able to be completely contained and controlled in one day. Again, low potential for escape, as I mentioned, minimum values at risk. And then the local fire departments, this is a whole nother discussion. The ability for the fire departments to help is a bit murky. And I've had so many different versions of this. We were going to burn a government facility here in Boulder, and they had hired us privately to oversee the burn. But I don't have resources of my own. I should have probably mentioned that. I don't have a crew. So I hire people, and I hire those people because 30 plus years in this business, I know a lot of good people that I can count on. But the other thing we try to do is always reach out to the local fire department and see if they would like to help. And I leave it up to them to decide whether they are allowed to help. That's kind of how I do it. And so we were going to burn here in Boulder at a government facility. And I thought because it was a government facility, all these other government agencies would be able to help on the burn, because we kind of look at it as you're not helping a private firm, you're helping to reduce the risk in your area, and you're helping another government agency in this case. So we all kind of framed it as that, but one of the agencies decided to ask their higher ups and their attorney whether or not they could really do this. And the answer came as, it's unclear, but I don't want to find out. And that trickled, and we couldn't do the burn. I lost absolutely every single agency that was going to help us, bailed on me. So that's reality. I'm just sharing this with you. Other times we go out and we do get help from fire departments. The local fire departments are more than glad to help. They see it as an opportunity to get some good training in, and they commit to the process, and it's awesome. We can't do this alone. I mean, I can hire absolutely everyone I need to, but that cost is going to go way up. So it's really nice to have that. Having said that, again, it's unclear whether a local fire department should help a private contractor burn on private land. And I think you all know that probably within your own agencies, there's a lot of variation in that. With that, though, what I would like to do is make a pitch. What I would like to see in the future, in Rod's perfect world, is, I feel like we need to gap that. We need to make that bridge, because just like Dave Lasky spoke on what all he said, ditto for me in terms of interagency cooperation and the ability to work together to get the right things done. It's, I know that the problem becomes like, oh, well, you're for profit, so we can't help you because you're making money. But I think if we turn that around and say, look, what we're doing it for, the reasons we're doing it is what's important, right? Are we reducing risk in a given area? Is that in your jurisdiction and therefore in your benefit to do this? And then the big piece of this that I really want to talk about more and at the council level, Kirk, is that the state has a very large workforce now. They have all sorts of resources, and I feel that it would be beneficial to all of us to start to incorporate them into these burns, to be able to hire them or use them. I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that's an opportunity that it'll keep the, it'll meet the training needs, and it'll also help get the projects completed. And so I do think that needs some further discussion down the road. We were planning to that end. There was about a 12,000 acre unit, well, the project was 12,000 acres, and we were going to do it in 3 units. And that was working with the state, in fact, and we were hoping to have that project, and then COVID came and shut us all down. So we didn't get a chance to really develop that, but I do hope that that's somewhere we can go in the future. So I do think that, that we need to continue to find ways to do this work, to continue to do prescribed burning, and it, the land ownership shouldn't matter. It should be more about achieving this ultimate goal that we're all trying to get to. So I did want to show you 3, this is very quick examples of projects I've done, and to give you a sense of how they vary quite a bit. So one extreme, if you will, I showed you those slides of 35 engines and all those folks. Well, on the right there, you see the full Anchor Point crew for this particular burn. This is really all we needed. Up in the far left, you're seeing what we're burning. So these were Russian olive piles. This was a large project that was done in eastern Colorado, where they were cutting Russian olive out of the river corridor. And within doing that, they were just building piles, and they built piles for 3 years. And then somebody finally scratched their head and said, what do we do with these piles? And so my trusty X15 flamethrower that you see in the lower left was the perfect tool for the job. And what happened though is, just to give you some real life example, the first time I went out there with 6 people, and we did, blivets of Lumigel and that kind of thing. And we could not get those piles to burn because it was Russian olive. It wasn't conifer. And lo and behold, the guy forgot to mention they'd only been cut about 9 months ago. So that was an example of when I lost a lot of money. I had to take everyone out to eastern Colorado. I had to put them up in motels and feed them and whatnot, and then get all this stuff. We went out there and we hit it hard for an entire day, lighting piles that just wouldn't light. So that was a real lesson learned. Went back, regrouped, and then I bought that flamethrower, which I highly recommend to anyone. Very fun tool. It gets the job done if you're burning piles. So with that, I went back out and did it again, but did not make money on that, let's just say. This is another example of the kind of pile burning we do. And the lower left, you might almost make out a person way in the corner there to give you an idea of scale. So these are massive machine piles from a clear cut. This is in a subdivision that cleared an acre of beetle kill and then piled it, and then again found out how expensive it would be to remove the material if they were to have it hauled off, chipped, what have you. And so they were told, oh, you should burn it, it's really cheap. So then I was hired to do that. And in this case, low risk, like I spoke about, right? The whole area is cleared, so I'm not worried about it escaping. Obviously, there's snow on the ground. The only risk was if you see that house up there at the top on the high left, there was no chance of the fire obviously running up there in the middle of a snow field. But what did start to happen is the radiant heat. We started to notice the roof of that house, the radiant heat, the snow started to melt off of that roof. And that obviously was a little bit concerning, but we were able to mitigate that. But this one was a good profit because it was a small contained area. I didn't have to do any prep work, and it only took, there were 3 of us lighting this thing, right? So there's no equipment costs or anything like that. And then this is a recent example. This is in Denver, and I wanted to mention this one because I know Boyd in his smoke discussion, you talk about places with the air sheds and the sensitive smoke areas. Well, Denver would be that one. And this, I should have shown you an aerial, but this is surrounded by over 4,000 homes. This is a golf course. I burned about 12 acres of cattails. Not a huge risk. On the upper left, you can see there's a sidewalk there. There's mowed grass. So that's what we look for in terms of being able to get something accomplished. This was a great burn. This cattail marsh was just decadent, as you can see, even in the foreground there. And by burning all this away, I've since talked to him, and he said it's all coming back and it's wonderful. And we achieved what we wanted from it. But again, small organization. Denver Fire has a fire station. I'm not exaggerating. It's the next building over from the golf clubhouse. They couldn't help me. So that's the kind of thing we run into. So instead, I was able to hire a different fire department and pay them AD rates the same way they would on a fire. And that's another thing you can do is any fire department that has those cooperative agreements in place with the state, you can offer to just pay them the same rates. And that's what we did. And so I was able to get fire department help to accomplish this one. But this was burned in January. So I don't know if you can make out, there's a bit of snow in there, and the next day it snowed again. So, that's how we mitigate risk. That's how we get it done. But we are not doing the large acreages that I love, I would love to see us do, but it's just not something that's possible at this moment. All right, and with that, I will open up to questions.
Well, we have a fair amount of time set aside, 25 minutes or so. It's 20 till noon, so we have about 15 minutes. So if you have specifics for Rob, please jump in. Or if you have questions in general based on what you've heard so far, please throw those out and we'll try to answer. So let me go back to Dave. Are you on, Dave?
Yep, I got you loud and clear.
Okay. One of the things that you talked about was, I believe it was you talked about having, or maybe it was Rod, I lost track, there's been a lot discussed, but the idea of getting a long-term commitment to the upper level people. And that is really a difficult process. Do you have any, real life examples of how you convey to, say, one of your board members, in my experience with the Nation Conservancy, they're CEOs of like one of the biggest banks in the industry on our board. And when we said we wanted to light, a ranch on fire, he had absolutely no interest. It took, a couple of years of field tours and trips and going to other sites, actually, other states. And I wondered, what's your experience of trying to cultivate that upper level leadership support? And it runs with the agencies too. We all know that the board of supervisors vary.
Yeah, I mean, maybe starting there, that's certainly been our experience. And maybe this is similar to what Rod was talking about, which is we have such a world of finite resource. To some extent, we are working where people are already committed, and it is easier. And Mike, I think you're right. It can be very, very hard to move people along that acceptance continuum. I will say that I think recently civilian fatality fires have changed the tone of the conversation. And again, it's not that anybody likes it, it's just they dislike the other options even more. I think also what we're seeing though is, again, insurance is just becoming a deal killer again and again and again. And I don't know, we've had projects now shut down several times because the organization just was not willing to accept the risk. So I guess that's not really much of an answer other than to say, I think what you're saying is true. And I think the long-term path to success is let's continue to work where we can. And as we have more and more positive impact, I think people slowly move along that continuum.
This is Rod. When I was with the agency, the first place that I started was with my chief. And, if you don't have the support there, you're not going to get much further. So I made sure that he was always in the loop, always comfortable, answer any questions he had, or through him, usually through council members or boards or what have you that had concerns, then we would go address them. I think it's continuous, is my point here. It's not something you do once. With the baby steps, the beginning of the program, one of the things we did was take all the big wigs and stakeholders, politicos, out to the burn units and try to make them as comfortable as you could with what it is we were trying to do, the why, the more educational piece of why we're trying to do this, and kind of give them a broad perspective. And then what really works well is giving people drip torches. Invite the people that need to support your program, invite them to the burns. I don't know anyone who doesn't like going to a prescribed burn, especially if they don't have to do any work and they can leave when they want. It's kind of the best of all worlds. So I do recommend that. I think, jokingly, I mean, yes, they do get a grin on their face when they get a drip torch, but the other thing that they get out of it is they see how much work goes into it. And they see that this is not some, off the cuff little thing we're doing. They see the amount of professionalism and effort that goes into a prescriber, and they see the holding crews and they see the briefings, and they really get to see that, okay, you guys, you don't just run out there and light something on fire. There's a lot to it. And, that is just something you have to do. It's part of being a good burn boss. I think it's just always keeping the people who are gonna, make the big decisions. They're the ones you've got to keep comfortable all the time, and it never ends.
And Mike, maybe one last thing to throw out there is where I think we've had success moving folks along actually is when we're not the ones who are asking, but it's another partner. So it's not the implementer who's asking for the support, but it's the local watershed group or other community level organizations who are also behind the project. I think that's an important way to show multiple stakeholders want to do it, not just the folks holding the torch.
Right. Got a question here.
Hi guys, this is Ashley Harrison. Hey, I think, and Dave, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd like to hear your thoughts about kind of balancing this doing prescribed fire in really high priority areas and versus or in conjunction with, or bringing people along with doing it with places where the people are willing to do the work? And how do we kind of shape that narrative and bring people along that are in the high priority areas that may not be as willing to embrace prescribed fire? But I think there was a question mark.
I mean, I think one first step is kind of using pile burning as a gateway drug. And so I think working with DFPC and other partners to get folks trained and burning piles, and like Rod was saying, experiencing the drip torch is the first step to getting folks conceptualizing larger scale projects in the WUI. So I think that's really where it's got to start. And it has the added benefit that I don't know a lot of burn bosses who are ever going to be willing to burn in the WUI in an untreated stand. So the work's got to happen anyways. And if we can use the work to bring people along, I think through kind of a co-op model, I think that's a successful, we've seen that actually be successful.
We have to have buy-in from the community. We have to have those meetings, those outreach meetings. We have to have sit-down sessions with folks. We have to talk to our federal partners. We have to talk to all the stakeholders that could be impacted by this project sooner rather than later, and give them the opportunity to contribute to the planning process, contribute to the implementation process. Because if we don't have community buy-in, we're just going to keep failing. So we need to get those groups out. You know, it's put it out there on social media, put it out there for everybody to attend that wants to, that can, and be willing to listen to folks that don't like prescribed fire at all, to try to explain to them what we're doing, you know, why this is good, this is an opportunity. So we invite everybody to come, not just the ones we think are going to support us, it's everybody. So we got to have that buy-in.
And I would follow up and say that starts with, before you're even thinking of prescribed fire dates, that in most scenarios in the WUI, you're going to want your treatments first. And you need to have that community support to get those treatments implemented. And so it goes much further back than just, okay, we're ready to burn. It starts way back at the beginning. We got an issue here we need to address. You start with the fuels treatment. And, you know, there's some communities where they're all about it. We have strong homeowner association or county government, whatever it may be, it's all about, let's get this fuel reduced. Yeah, cutting trees is a good thing. But we all know there are others too, it's totally opposed to it. So it starts much further back than just prescribed fire.
Actually, one last thing that I would add is if you can be working with a community who has yet to write or update their CWPP, we really need to be getting prescribed fire in as a recommendation in CWPPs, because I think increasingly CWPPs are linked to grant funding. And if it's not in the CWPP, it won't get funded and it won't happen. And I think with the CWPPs, we're working with folks who do understand fire. And if we can at least get it in the plan, that's also an important enabling condition.
Another question back here?
Yeah, kind of a follow-up to that, just comment that you just made. For long-term management plan, under kind of a perpetual conservation system, do you have much experience including prescribed fire? Do, because this is an easement that will be effective like a perpetuity for hundreds of years. Do you recommend referencing a certification or any kind of document that would give more certainty to the agency putting that conservation on will meet certain basic?
Well, I think, let me try to synthesize the question a bit. If it's a long-term easement that the land board is working on or with someone else, and they want to include prescribed fire as one of the management options, and is there some key language to put in that? Is that kind of what you want?
Right. The only other tool that we're trying to have in there is some kind of prescriptive grazing option, but largely because I think in some preferences would be a preference for prescribed fire, but the uncertainty involved with that, we then have to launch a reason, but I'd like to include fire as another option too.
All right, so just, go ahead. Kurt.
Yeah, from the state perspective, since it's the landlord, and if you're leasing the property, the first thing you need to do is make sure that fire is included in your agreement. Can you use fire as a tool within that state agreement with that landlord? I'm saying you don't own the land, obviously, the state doesn't own it. You do own the land. Okay, well, if you put it in your land management plan or a fire management plan of some kind, then sure, I mean, I wouldn't know why it couldn't be utilized at some point, as long as it, met all the minimums, it met all the
Yeah.
standards.
I think the language would have to be something along the lines of the, prescribed fire, good tool on this site, we believe would be beneficial, and it should follow the current, the standards at the time of implementation established by the FPC. And here, or even, NWCG, I don't know if you want to go quite that far, but sure, the FPC.
Well, I'm specifically thinking of wetland mitigation plans, or stream mitigation plans. So these are regulatory plans approved by either the Army Corps of Engineers or in the case of species plans, beneficial knowledge. And so they're the ones that have to prove the easement. We're not holding the easement, we can't trust the whole easement. We continue to look at the company. It's just that, I just wondered if you had any experience working with land trusts or the Army Corps of Engineers in terms of the use of prescription fire.
We're going down that road right now out at the South Republican State Wildlife Area. So I don't really have an answer for you yet because we're just starting to go down that path to figure out what that looks like. So I guess stay tuned. It's all new to us as well. So we're trying to figure that out.
The Corps of Engineers, it depends which office, if it's Albuquerque or Denver. There's a lot of nuances there. Good luck.
Yes.
Okay, anybody? Yes. One more question, but I think we probably better wind it down.
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's Rachel Hanby with Western Resource Advocates. Wanted to re-ask a question, going back to Kirk Will's presentation about the prescribed burner program. And we were talking about the breakdown between people who sign up for the classes versus people who ultimately complete the certification. And just wanted to see if you all, from your perspective as nonprofits or private burners, had any thoughts on why that might be from your perspective.
Well, this is Rod. I mean, I would think one of the reasons is because you just don't get the opportunity to do that many burns. Ideally, the person who takes the class should already have some burns set up, or a bunch of slash piles in the case of the bee, ready to go. And maybe they just don't have that opportunity to implement and get the task book signed off. That would be I don't know, that would be speculation, I guess. I came at it a little differently since I already had the quals, but I do know that from the private side, and I have mentioned this before, the time commitment is challenging for folks who, if you're a ranch hand, what have you, on top of all the other things that you do.
I would agree with Rob that I think, particularly in the Front Range, but also, Durango area, the heavy WUI areas, snow can be so inconsistent. The day you get a good burn window is the day that someone can't make it inevitably. So I think there's some logistical issues like that. I think on the upside, though, is doing the pile burner class is also teaching people to build good piles. And I see an enormous amount of a barrier because we've got a lot of bad piles out there, poorly built, poorly placed, and that raises cost and increases complexity. And so by getting landowners to participate even in the classroom section, which may not get the statistic of a trained individual, it means they're well positioned to build better piles on their property, which I think then encourages fire departments and others to consider a project.
Okay, we're rapidly approaching 12. Some people have a tour this afternoon. I appreciate the presenter's time. And I appreciate your time, folks on the Zoom that were just observing. Appreciate everybody's time. And we touched a lot of topics, but as a council, I'll ask when you fill out your survey for the conference, if you have ideas of what we could do in the future for another workshop regarding prescribed fire, put that in there. We really want to know so we can look into the future. So with that, anything else, Chris?
No, thank you guys for coming. Yep.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the conference and thank you.
Thank you, guys.